So welcome everybody to Improving Our World Through Wise Material Use. Again, my name is Nick Custer with the Innovation Incubator, and we're very happy to have you join us today. Today's session is essentially how your business can grow and adapt in a changing world by embracing concepts such as corporate social responsibility and just general sustainability strategies while still meeting those traditional customer expectations. With that being said, though, I'm very excited for our session today, and we're very lucky to have our speaker, Mr. John Bradburn. John retired in early 2018 as the Global Manager of Waste Reduction for General Motors after more than 39 years of service. His waste reduction role included leading the company's landfill-free zero waste initiative, which resulted in an industry-leading 152 GM operations around the world, reusing, recycling, and converting all of the energy from their waste of daily operations. John is an expert in waste reduction, recycling, and the circular economy, and was actually dubbed GM's MacGyver for devising unconventional uses for everyday waste. While at GM, John frequently mentored other companies pursuing zero waste and sustainable materials management goals. And so, of course, upon retirement, he wanted to delve back into that. And so he formed Sustainable Materials Solutions, LLC, and began consulting with other companies, communities, and entrepreneurs seeking to create sustainability programs and ecosystem-based solutions. His work engages numerous business sectors and external stakeholder groups, including governmental agencies, academia, and NGOs to promote cross-sector collaboration and innovative solutions to local and global challenges. I could talk about John's achievements all day. I'll just highlight a couple more. We'll let him speak for himself. But John frequently is a speaker at various sustainability-focused events. And he's actually been recognized with 4 Environmental Excellence in Transportation Awards for material development, reuse, and recycling projects by the Society of Automotive Engineers. In 2015, John received the Presidential Lifetime Service Award from the Office of the President of the United States for sustainability services to youth. So like I said, he's got a wealth of information and experience, and we're very happy to have him. And with that, I'd like to welcome Mr. John Bradburn.
Thank you, Nick. Let me go ahead and share my screen now. All right. I'll jump right in it. As you can see here, I do a lot of pictures, and some are a bit different, but they're all meant to convey a thought. Now I do need to move over. Let's see, how do I minimize? There we go. Yeah, I just had to minimize the participant window so that I could see my entire screen. So all set here. For those of you who have been around a while, and as you can tell, I have, I'm not a young man anymore. And I think there's some advantages to that. Tree hugger was a common word years ago, and I'm sure everybody's heard that word, but I view myself as a tree hugger from day one. And now I see myself as a modern tree hugger. If you look at the base of this tree, you're going to see that it's basically a dead tree. And it was afflicted by an invasive, kind of how we are today. This was an emerald ash borer, and I lost at least 2,000 trees on my farm in Grand Blanc, Michigan, over this particular exotic species. And you know, we're continually challenged with these very things. And as I said, boy, can we relate to that today. So let me flip our slides here. Okay. I got a little story here. I was at Duke University about 5 years ago, and there was a presentation there done by one of the professors, and he asked the group who were primarily environmental sustainability people, what's the greatest sustainability challenge that the world faces today? And just about everybody said climate change. And you know, I understand that, but there's more to that story, I think. And I raised my hand and I said, well, I think it's global turbulence. And everybody looked at me like deer in the headlights and like, what is this nutcase talking about here? And I said, well, global turbulence is happening today, and it comes in many forms. And I just started describing these things, hurricanes and floods and tsunamis and biodiversity loss, terrorism, crime, Hopefully this is starting to make some sense. Disease, poverty, hunger, unemployment, mental illness. All these things come into play, I think, as it relates to what we face around the world. And in particular, if you looked at the people involved in these things right now, in fact, with the pandemic going on, I don't really think that sustainability is on the minds of a lot of the people that have gone through these things, like this particular picture I'm showing. This is an older picture, but every year around the world or closer to home in the United States, we run into these conditions. Again, another old picture from the Middle East. Massive amounts of migration happening around the world, as we all know. And of course, near and dear to us now and affecting the whole world as well is our crisis with the particular pandemic. Now, I'm going to go into some philosophical titles here and then back it up with a little bit of detail. So we're going to get into the weeds here and some things, but I start with a saying that I don't really espouse to this one, but I think we've all heard it: keeping things simple is stupid, and that line through there is meant to be how I see it. And this is really how I like to say it: keeping things simple is stupid, because when you start impacting multiple impact factors within the same project and maximizing the amount of time we have available to get things done, the more you can do within the same project or program or effort makes the absolute best sense. So I call it keeping things simple is stupid. Now, we got to do that within reason, of course. I like to use an ecosystem approach in material use, applying what I call the new P2, which does stand for pollution prevention, but I also call it passion and persistence. You want to be able to approach subjects with passion and persistence. That's really the most important factor, beyond education, beyond resources, and all those sort of things. If you've got those two factors, you can get a lot done. And again, going after multi-sector impacts. So I'll touch on some of those by example. How do you do a project that relates to materials and take care of people of need, challenged populations, wildlife, resource use, waste reduction, energy reductions? All those sort of things really help us a lot, and try to seek natural and developed world solutions, because we have a very, very diverse world and many diverse cultures. And the more we can tie in our natural world into urban situations and try to solve these particular problems that go back and forth, the better off we're going to be. Emphasizing local consideration, keeping things local, trying to value those certain needs within a society and a community. Community-based solutions are so important. And then working together with our environment, health, and safety people, and bringing in the financial aspects, because economics plays a huge role in sustainability as well as material use. So, okay, let's go. And it starts with the design phase. Most people know that. The first bullet there talks about green chemistry and applying that mindset. I always found it interesting, and I don't think things have changed in the last couple of years, but until then, for sure, most people don't realize it, but you could get a PhD in chemistry in the United States and not even take a toxicology class. And to me, that's just unbelievable how that can happen, because our chemists, of course, are developing some amazing type of chemistries, but we certainly need to understand the chemistry as it relates to toxicology as well. And those people that are developing them certainly would be better off if that could be done as well as us. So these are just a couple examples. Sustainable packaging specification, recently wrote one, offered it up to the auto industry as a whole. And that gives many design for the environment concepts into packaging the design. So, you can get the right pallet size. You can look at certain foams. You can look at how do you attach containers? What sort of materials are best for recycling, for reuse, repurposing, and being able to last the entire longevity of the particular program or that container need. Again, you could go on and design for the environment or design for sustainability, and it certainly makes a huge difference up front. However, we got to work the tailpipe through as well and target end-use applications to fill in that infrastructure gap. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of areas that aren't able to process materials after they've been generated as a byproduct. And that's where entrepreneurship comes in. That's where business development comes in, and working with academics and working with the political structure and economic development groups, so that you can build businesses around filling in those gaps. I'll speak to that in more detail too. In fact, here's one as well. This is a recent project that I did that related to the Gulf of Mexico. There was a desire during the jazz festival that is held in New Orleans every year to take the water bottles, and as you can imagine, many water bottles are generated by people drinking water during that festival, and they were collected, and the thought was, okay, let's do something special with them. So the folks at Shell reached out to me and said, can we, work this out? And I worked this with the U.S. Business Council for Sustainable Development, in fact, and set up the infrastructure. What we found was there wasn't a lot of, wasn't all the key elements required in order to validate. And the goal was to take those water bottles and put them into an end-use application targeted to help out the coastal resilience in the Gulf and infrastructure. In other words, the petroleum lines, the pipelines, erosion control, all those various factors of need because of the aggressive type wave activity and amount of water flow into the Gulf. So here's what happened. Set up a recycling program that would sort and bale the bottles as close to possible. In fact, that was down in Louisiana. Wash and flake the chips, and that was done in North Carolina. We had to move them because that particular technology wasn't available in the area. Then we extruded into fibers and then manufactured a matrix, which is a lofted type material made from those water bottles. And all along the way, we communicated it and set it up. This is not what's typically done for producing a product. It's just not normally done. And what is done is the material itself is generated and it's sold. Where it goes, who knows? And in a lot of cases, the plastics over the years have gone to China or Asia or a developing country who would then process it. And when those materials go in that direction, the country or location that generated it loses all these various opportunities to further develop the material into something that is profitable and can be reused locally. But in this case, we kept it as close to home as possible and developed a material that was deployed into the Gulf. And I'm going to show you a couple pictures. What you're seeing are floating islands that are in the Gulf of Mexico now, and there's others as well. But these were made out of water bottles and earmarked from the Jazz Festival. And we marked that material and proved that it flowed through that actual infrastructure into this end use. They're mixed into a matrix bound within another material. As you can see, there's some kids planting some vegetation on top, and then they're deployed. So it's a use for bottles. And in this particular case, it was that was the intent. So it was a targeted application. And these are the things that, really need to be done more. Because a lot of times when people say, well, let's recycle our water bottles, and we set them bottles out to the curb and somebody picks them up, and where they go, we just don't know. Most of the time we don't know. And I think that's something that creates great opportunity when we do know and can target end use applications that can impact and help us from an environmental perspective and economic perspective. So I call this one, having an idea is one thing, but getting done is another. You can sit in a room with a bunch of people and start talking about ideas and, come up with some fabulous ideas. But then the next question is, okay, how do we get it done? And that's when things start getting tough. But at any rate, this is a material. As you can see, it's mixed. It's very, very, very challenging material. That was in New York. It was in a factory, old factory, about 100 years old. And you can see gloves in there. You can see some oil. You can see some, it's what's called a pre-coat material, filter material. There's some metal in there and there's some water in there. That plant wanted to be zero waste. And that plant, the manager did not want any of his processes in the plant changed or altered. He wanted that plant zero waste. And by the way, don't mess with his equipment is really what it meant. So we had to deal with that particular material, walked in and seen it, set up a conference call, got some suppliers and processors on the line. And this is what we set up. That was to start out with centrifuging the material to phase separate the solids from the liquids, pull the oil out. We filtered that oil itself, used and pulled out the moisture, brought it back to spec, and then sent it right back into the very machine that generated it at that actual site. And that process in itself paid for the entire zero waste program for that plant. But there was more material. The metal fines went to a recycling center, and a lot of the material, like the filter bags, some of the pre-coat went to waste energy. So basically, it was a zero waste solution. There was some reuse as well as some recycling done there. So that slide, in fact, was shown during the G7 conference a few years ago in Germany, and they felt it was kind of interesting because one, the plant was so old that some of the modern equipment and some of the modern processing techniques allow for separation of materials at the point of generation, whereas in this case it was all lumped into one gondola and had to deal with it that way. So anyway, this one here, close to home, as you know, in Flint. I was born and raised in Flint, by the way. There's always stories behind the main story, and I want to tell you this one. And some of you know this one. It was a special one, and it received a lot of attention after it was done by environmental groups and such. You're seeing a warehouse up at the top left of some of the water that was stored in a warehouse near Flint that ended up going to the residents to supply that. And when that started happening, I quickly realized there's going to be a whole lot of water bottles. So working with some of the local companies that were collecting them up and helping out with the Flint lead in the water crisis, we set up a project I called Do Your Part. And as you can see in the little caption, it was made possible by a couple people who are working on sainthood and an angel. And I'll show you the angel in a minute. But there was a sewing center, top right, set up at the New Life Center, actually, in Flint. And filters were made, and those filters went into many, many GM plants. They were made actually out of the water bottles. There's an insulation material there on the bottom right. That insulation, by the way, this is a polyester lofted blend of material that was one of the partners helped put this, design that particular lofting material for the filters to meet the specs of air filtration. And what you're seeing on the bottom right was a very similar material that was generated from engine manifold cover there for the Chevrolet trucks. And then we were able to apply that, and I'll show you. This is the flow chart that gives the detail. So there were many, many generation points at the the column on the left there, the locations that some were zero waste, some weren't, that all jumped in and helped generate these bottles. And two locations were set up to receive the materials. The ones out of Flint went to Chupan, which is a great local company. And also down in Detroit, there's a recycler there that received the materials. Now I'm going to move through this fairly quick, except for this pop-up I just showed. The gray box near the top, overseas, a common alternative. And that was so common until recently. The recent element I'm talking about happened about 2 years ago, and that was what was called the China Sword. There's different names for it, but basically where a lot of import permits were revoked or stopped to not allow various plastics to go into China. So that was before the pandemic. But prior to that, I've heard estimates 60-70% of the plastics generated for recycling ended up in China. And when we do that, and that typically was done by the recyclers around the country, that is a point where that plastic value is at its lowest, and is also the most difficult first step, is to sort and bale. So all these steps that I'm going to start showing represent jobs and represent economic gain that was not happening under normal circumstances. But in this case, we tried to keep that material as close to home as possible and generate this supply chain, what some people call it. I call these supply webs because they have different connections and different feelers. They're more resilient than supply chains. Supply chains can break. All you got to do is take out one link and it's done, right? Whereas a web can go in different directions, can seek more opportunities. And that's what happened here. Some of these companies, after this particular project stopped, were able to, because of this project, gain new jobs in other areas. And here I'm going to show you the angel. And this is Veronica Scott. She's in Detroit. She runs what's and started the empowerment plan in Detroit. If you ever wondered if there's some angels walking around, you're looking at one right there. And this is a video. I won't show it, but it's a video that talks about the project itself. Okay. So for those who are of the faithful type, I'd like to ask that question, and I do fairly often. So if we believe God created the air we breathe, the soil that grows our food, and the water, and the rivers, lakes, and oceans, why would we pollute it? Why would we generate a material waste, trash, or whatever you want to call it, and throw it away? It's a question that I think would be difficult for somebody to answer, why we would do that if they do believe that God created the heavens and the earth. So this project is a bit aged, but was hugely significant, I think, in proving out that things can be done when you have even a small group of people working on challenges. And this is a picture from the Gulf of Mexico oil spill. I'll go through it fairly quickly, but just so you know, this project was done and back during the spill to recover the value of the resources inside those oil booms that soaked up the oils on the ocean. 227 miles of that boom was recovered and made Chevrolet Volt parts in the bottom. Picture on the right is the actual part, the various materials that went into it. We used probably 99.5% recycled content. It included some other materials that were generated from plant operations and post-consumer collections. And then here's some statistics and some data. But basically, this project had people impressions of 500 million. So in other words, 500 million people heard about this project through the various media outlets. So it definitely was understood back then. Waste I view as a resource that's out of place. And I think we all do when we look at it closely, especially when you consider, it can have financial value, great financial value, particularly with metals. And, today, now the prices for metals is down, plastics is down, but they're going to come back. But what you really want to do from the manufacturing perspective is the real goal is to generate zero revenue from your byproducts. And the reason you would want to generate zero revenue is because you're consuming your materials within your process. In other words, you're efficient. If you generate waste, you got to work towards reducing it or eliminating it. And of course, that is kind of a common sense thing, but yet it needs to be reiterated. It's called total waste. In other words, don't generate something, and it's quite higher in that pollution prevention hierarchy. This is a project specific that I think really helped open people's eyes to the financial value. I did a project called Byproducts and tied together many different groups within GM way back, 2009-ish. And it was significant because it put the dollar sign on environmental work. And there were environmental people, environmental professionals that didn't really want to jump on board with this. Most did. Leadership absolutely did. And what we did was take parts that would have gone to foundries, and we definitely would have made some money on that metal. Of course, this is primarily steel here, but there were other metals. But the goal here was, let's take those and that have slight dents and scratches and sell them under a controlled condition to certain dealers, and let's make some more money on it. And that project brought in a lot of money. That particular year, this project, along with all the metals, all the cardboard, all the various plastics, and you name it, recycling, reuse, and repurposing value to the company was at $1.147 billion from recycle and reuse. So it was putting together all the various financial aspects to those activities around the world. And it was a bit of a surprise that there was that much money involved, but that tells you right there how important it is to understand your financials as it relates to doing environmental work. Recycling's good. Repurposing is better. Reuse is better than that, and not generating it is the best. So I call this, don't see things as they are, see them for what they can become. This is a very recent example of a project that I'm doing. What you're seeing there is light reflecting off wet surfaces of goose decoys. Odd targeted end-use applications are needed, or different end-use applications are needed because you're looking at vehicle parts. And when you try to stay in the same sector all the time with all your options, you're going to miss opportunities. I've seen this material on the top, the goose head on the top, and knew that it would be able to diffuse light. So matching the physical properties of an actual goose. The picture below with the shiny neck and head, that is a store purchased decoy, of which reflects light when it's wet, not like an actual bird in the field. So that's going to flare them. They're very smart birds. Most people know that. And so these materials are being used today, and again, matching up the physical properties. Here's what they look like out in the field. And again, these are vehicle parts, repurposed. They're scrap and waste. Now, what's interesting about it is the difficulty in recycling that material as it existed as a vehicle part is massive. And the reason why is it's got polyester, polypropylene, and polyethylene mix. They got different melt flows and very, very difficult to recycle. Here's some turkeys, repurposed. There's a company now that's been formed, and these are being sold. And the material itself, again, was scrap and waste. All right, here's a sustainability story close to home. On the right, you're seeing an empty parking lot in Detroit, in Mexican Town. On the left, you're seeing the GM plant in Orion, probably 20 miles south of Flint. And you're seeing some baskets coming in from Korea that had vehicle parts in them, and they were being sold for the metal value, which is good, but it's not great. I was asked to get involved in that project because, people seen them and they said, "Oh my gosh, those baskets are still good. What can we do with them?" And so I went and made a trailer, and then I was sent down to a guy in Detroit who had a company down there called the Ideal Group. And he said, "John, can I get a bunch of them?" And I said, "Yeah." "How many you want?" He said, "About 200. So we did that. And we put one there, and we added a family, local family, to get some of this material in those containers. And this is what we got. It's a raised bed urban garden in Mexican Town with the Ideal Group. It's just a wonderful project. The local residents come in on Wednesdays and they can harvest and take care of the vegetables. Local student groups come in and help out as well. And the Ideal Group helps take care of it as well. So what it does is it provides some really great opportunity, especially for the kids, to be able to, work in the soil, and see this miracle of food, fresh food, being raised right there near their homes. And there was a friend of mine, a very dear friend of mine, who was involved. And she's an entrepreneur. Passion Murray's her name. And she supplied the first compost in there. And what you've seen in the previous picture with the kids there, that material, that compost, the soil mix, came into that garden from her system that she created. So, again, I think a big disconnect, especially in America, is entrepreneurs who see opportunities in these various material types and jump in to help out by gaining some financials and growing companies, and creating companies to help address some of these disconnects that we have in these supply webs. So what you're looking at here is a Chevy Volt battery part. It's the outer cover sleeve of the battery itself. It is a material that cannot be recycled in traditional ways. Extremely well engineered. It fits into a category of materials that are called thermosets. In other words, it's cross-linked. You could heat it and heat it and heat it. It will not melt. It'll only eventually catch on fire. And composites are very common in electric vehicle batteries, but they're also very common in new technologies. Wind turbines, for instance, have a lot of composites. So, when the actual part reaches the end of its life as that first use part, it's very difficult to find another recycle option. But so you got to even look at its properties again, its shape, its structure, its strength. So I had an idea or two, and I thought, well, okay, I know what to do with that. I know what to do with that and that. So I took some home from the South Detroit, Brownstown Township battery plant, and got this. This is a duck nesting in my backyard on a tree. Most people don't know, but some duck species, this is a wood duck, nest in trees. And it's just this hen is just happy as can be because she found a home and has her eggs in there, and her babies will be jumping out soon. So it's repurposed. It's a form of reuse. And it's, again, it's an entrepreneurial spirit that's needed in order to figure these things out. And, people really need to look at what interests them. I had an interest in waterfowl and birds. So when I seen that emergency disconnect hole, which is where she's coming out of, that's the emergency disconnect hole, I enlarged it a little bit, stuck it on a tree, and lo and behold, a few thousand of these later, this is not a one-time deal. This project has continued and does continue. So it's an example of not necessarily just thinking out of the box, but never getting into the box. And here's Mr. and Mrs. Wood Duck, standing proudly with their clutch inside. Again, there's probably about 2,000 of these out in the field right now, including other parts of the world, including this one in China. I sent some over to China, working with some scientists over there, actually some Russian scientists who ended up getting them into China, and also teamed up with the World Wildlife Fund. And you're looking at one of the rarest birds on the earth. There's only an estimated 2,400 of these birds left, with a small flock in Russia and a small flock in China. This is a scaly-sided merganser, and she successfully raised a clutch. And as you can see, the baby's jumping right on out, and they're going down about 30 meters to the ground and just bounce up, and away they go to the water. This was the first time in China's history, I'm told by those PhD scientists, that an artificial nest box was used in China. Bat house made out of the Volt box. And there's, my gosh, maybe 1,000 of those out in the field now. This is a new one. It's hasn't gone real far. This is on the left, a threatened species, and in some places endangered. This is a burrowing owl. They live in the ground, typically in desert habitats or arid habitats, and they're going in and living in and nesting in an artificial nest structure because they're displaced so often and so much, in particularly around the Phoenix area and certain parts of Arizona. Because of the development, there's groups out there who help move them, but unfortunately not enough to take care of them all. But I'm working with one particular group out there, and I built the nest box there on the right, which is made out of 2 Chevy Bolt, that's B as in Bolt, battery parts that merge together. And I sent a prototype out there. They like it and they want more, and we're working on getting them more. I call this Empowering Way to Help Challenge Populations. Made a beehive. That's a beehive on the left, and it's in Detroit. At least it was a year ago. The repeating frames are in the center there. And those repeating frames are part of the actual battery itself as well, and hold the cells, the lithium-ion cells. But I put a hive media inside those frames, and that's where the honeycomb is formed, and put some holes in it. And it won some award after it was put in as a prototype in Changing World Ideas, I think it was what it was called. Anyway, I'm going to show you it actually worked and outperformed the traditional beehives. So hopefully you can see them bees buzzing around there as they're using them. Okay, that one was on the Bobian deck, which is, let's see, six stories up in the air next to the Renaissance Center. This is a project that I did in Flint at Kettering University. Working with some girls that are high school girls that were thinking about going into a university system and studying engineering. And we made a loon nest structure, loon, L-O-O-N, that wonderful, beautiful waterfowl bird. And then that platform was set up, I took it up to Harrison, Michigan on a lake there, and for allowing the loons to nest predator-free, see, because that's out in the lake as compared to shoreline nesting. All right, here's one for challenged individuals. And as you can see, some broccoli growing inside that Volt box flipped upside down. Had to have it tested for UV degradation and leaching, and that passed, so that could be considered food grade, that container. At any rate, we've got a lot of seniors who can't work at the ground level anymore, or physically challenged people of any age that have difficulty working at the ground level. So these raised bed gardens are good for that. This is about 3 feet long, so it's sizable. You can grow a fair amount of vegetables, and those were made available, and took some down to the Elmernoff Center there. It's in Genesee County for the students there as well. But again, it's thinking about things in a different way. You know, how do you see something in a product or a material type that doesn't exist today, and then develop and then scale it from there. Ocean plastics is a big deal, and it's gotten a lot of attention over the last several years, and it needs to. A lot of people point to, I think they call it about 7 sources or 7 rivers around the world that contribute a significant amount, but we got problems here too, and I'm going to show you. This picture, all those materials you're seeing are primarily plastic. This is in Memphis, Tennessee, Mississippi River, and I could not believe it. I hooked up a friend of mine, has a NGO called Living Lands and Waters, and we were going to do a cleanup, and I said to him, I said, Chad, well, he told me, he says, we're going to pick up anything that's over 5-gallon pail size. And I said, well, Chad, why would we do that? Why don't we pick up, little pieces? He said, John, you wait till you see it. I said, what am I going to see? He said, well, you look at it this way. Take a Walmart, for instance, turn it upside down and shake it. That's what you're going to find in there. And he was right. We cleaned up quite a bit of material, and then we later set up a zero waste program for all the material we clean. It's very, very challenging. It's extremely challenging to do things with this material, but things can be done, and I'm going to show you an example here. This is chunks of what most people call styrofoam. It's polystyrene, the white foam that you see floating places, and just used in coolers, and there was just tremendous amounts of it there in the Mississippi as well. In that case, boat docks, or just get caught up in storms and float into the river. Obviously, this material has all sorts of plastics in it, not just this, but I took some of this home, and I made this artificial rock from it without shaping it whatsoever. I took the rock, or the foam, excuse me, and I coated it and colored it, and it makes for a really good insulating interior grade artificial rock. So again, entrepreneurial opportunity, and it's just an unbelievable amount of material that's available out there. Here's some material as well. You're going to see barge rope there. You're going to see big chunks of rock, foam. Tires. Did a project, take those tires, and we made vehicle parts out of those as well. Had to really clean them hard because, boy, do they get a lot of biomatter and dirt on them. But again, this is our friends, Living Lands and Waters, that do these river cleanups. When we talk about ocean plastics, it's always good to realize that there's a broader category here, of course. Lakes and streams and rivers and creeks and ditches, they all collect this material too. And if there's movement in that stream, it's probably heading to the ocean, and I call those ocean-bound plastics, or I call them uncontrolled. So controlled plastics can be a great thing, but uncontrolled can be very difficult. Here's an application here. This is an artificial rock I made for a bear mount, black bear. Okay, here's one. My friends down at Texas A&M University, Matt Ali at Texas A&M, worked with him to find end-use applications for stamping off all. For those of you from Flint, Flint Stamping has these sort of materials, not this actual part, but these sort of materials. It's a byproduct of making doors. This is a window cutout. So if you look at that shape, it kind of looks like a window, right? The shapes of the cutouts, and Down at the bottom were some heating, venting, air conditioning brackets that were shaped from those cutouts as a reuse opportunity. And then this picture shows a rendering of what could be made from these shapes, these odd shapes, amoebic shapes. And again, the students there at Texas A&M put this together, and then this was presented along with many, many other sites by Dr. Ali at a international conference in Sweden here not too long ago. So nimble companies. I'm sure you're all hearing about companies that are stepping up during our pandemic. I'll just highlight one here. But as you know, there are many, many, many of them out there that are stepping up and doing some just fabulous things. Many of them are donated and others are making money, and some are doing both. And those are all good things. They're all good things. GDC Inc. is in Indiana. Great company. They've helped with several sustainability projects and are always interested in doing the greater good. GDC is what I call very nimble, and they're now producing face shields and masks. They are a tier 1 supplier to many, many of the automotive companies, and do a recycled content product called enduroprene. And in fact, they worked with us on that Gulf of Mexico project, and to compound, and that is mixed to get the right performance requirements for baffles that will move air around within the vehicle and direct and redirect. And they also do an insulation material that is a sound absorption material, but they tweak their machines so that they can produce masks, and they're being used. And again, this is one example of the thousands of companies. So to address that, this was formed. I'm working with a company called ERA Environmental Management Solutions, and they're based in Montreal, but do a lot of work in the United States as well. They are a software development company, but primarily around regulatory reporting and sustainability, health and safety, that sort of thing. We got to talking one day and said, you know, out of all these amazing things that are happening by companies that are stepping up, and individuals as well within those companies and doing it on their own to help out with the pandemic, wouldn't it be nice if we could summarize them and create some, key performance indicators, and maybe map it out and show these various elements as a whole, say an auto industry whole, all the autos, suppliers, service providers, and that sort of thing, and then other sectors as well. And they had started working on this program they call SERVE, and it's really about building a network and successes around goodwill. So it'll continue, and it'll have other offshoots. But right now, we're really putting a lot of work into, again, bringing together all these various great things that are happening inside the auto industry. I normally show a lot of show and tells when I present. It's going to be very difficult with this, so I don't have any. But if you have any questions on these, obviously working through UM-Flint, Nick, you can. I should have said that in the beginning. You can reach out to me because sometimes touching and feeling things is very important as well, or seeing them. All right. What you're looking at here is when we need to start our next generation environmentalists. This is 2-year-old Bo and 1-year-old Wes. On the left, Bo is planting milkweed seed, and that's gonna really do well, I'm sure, where we're putting it in. And he's gonna watch it grow, and we're gonna point it out to him. And then on the right, he and Wes are planting a swamp oak tree in a wetland that I'm developing as a wetland. And that is really, again, teaching these kids, because they're so important, touching the soil, working in the soil, seeing how things grow, enjoying nature, our natural world. And I can't emphasize how important that is, because these things will resonate with them, and they'll grow up being stewards of our earth, and we need more and more of those. And the earth certainly has to have good people there to take care of other people, as well as our soil and our air and our water. So with that, that's all I've got. And I don't even know what time it is here, but
It's about
uh,
1 o'clock. Uh,
yeah,
and if it's okay, I'll have you end the screen share there.
yep,
Perfect. If it's okay with you, maybe I'll lead with a question, and then we can kind of bring from anyone else that's got something that's pulling on them. But just for
absolutely.
some context, you had mentioned the empowerment plan. And so for those folks that don't know about the empowerment plan, it's another triple bottom line business that provides coats to homeless folks that also double up as sleeping bags. And so they have a very big kind of social component to the work they do. But I was actually surprised to hear that their environmental piece is directly linked to some of that processing work you had worked on. And I guess for me, thinking about the majority of the folks that we work with are a little smaller scale. How do you be an entrepreneur? How do you seek out those relationships with the supplier? Is GM, for example, is there a matchmaking site where you can find out what byproducts are possible to attain, or how do those relationships occur?
Yeah, I get asked that now and then. I don't think there's any actual step-by-step procedure in order to develop those relationships, but I think what's important is that you find what area interests you most, and just do research, talk to people, and the connections will happen. But that serve app, in fact, once that gets going, that'll help make those connections, because people will put in requests, and people will also then be able to see where there's need. I think we always do best in areas that interest us. So when we talk about helping others, such as the empowerment plan, actually, kind of a funny story there. How Veronica and I met. We were doing a movie together. It was a Planet Green discovery movie called Detroit in Overdrive, and we didn't know each other, but I knew I heard rather that she was making coats. So you, and this is really, I guess, would be a way to think about how to approach this issue, this question that you raised, Nick, and that is, I knew she was making coats. I sewed a lot as a kid because I was so skinny, my pants wouldn't fit me right, so I had to sew them to make them fit me, and so I learned how to sew, and I knew that she had that going. They were doing a photo shoot, so I approached her. I brought some material to her. I showed it to her. I said, "Hey, do you think this would work for your coats?" And she says, "This is really good. Where'd you get it? And who are you?" That's exactly what she said. And from then on, we became buddies. We still talk. In fact, I'll tell you, her empowerment plan right now is working on the pandemic response PPE. They're actually making some of those things. So they've been nimble enough to make that change as well. But as far as reaching out, man, there's a lot of need. It's unbelievable out there. But find something that interests you. And in that particular case, it was, she's just a wonderful lady, working on trying to help people who are homeless. So, when you find those sort of things, there's definitely venues and avenues to reach out. And, wildlife is important to me. So, there's a lot of organizations that work on wildlife. Habitat is important. Ducks Unlimited, Michigan Duck Hunters Association. And I could go on Wildlife Habitat Council. And so there's a lot of it out there.
Appreciate that. And that was a great way to kind of answer maybe a disjointed question about chicken or egg, right? About whether it's the
Yep.
passion, the material that's kind of leading the discussion and the discovery. Um,
Yeah.
are, are there other questions from folks? Because I know I got a ton, but I want to give you guys time to ask the ones that are pressing you. If anybody does have a question, go ahead and just unmute yourself, and we'll try to keep this orderly. And just in case they don't, back to serve. You
I
had,
have a I
oh,
have a comment.
yes, thank you.
Sorry, my webcam is not working, but um, I'm here to support John Bradburn. He mentioned the work that we did together. I'm not in the industry, but I'm an academic. I'm a professor of architecture at Texas A&M. And just to jump on your sort of last comment about how to make connections, so I came to know John through the United States Business Council for Sustainable Development, which also I knew them through a mutual Dutch friend of ours, that they think about similar ways of waste reduction and reuse. And it's really, as John mentioned in the beginning, it's how passionate are you, and how far you can go in making these ideas work. John didn't show maybe the latest development of the work that we have done together, but since I knew John about 4 years ago, we have developed many systems that's particularly work in the construction and building industry, where we take consistent waste flow from the auto industry and then transform it into building products. We've built actually prototypes, like full-scale prototypes on Texas A&M campus. We've built a living wall, about 14 foot high, 18 foot wide, as an example of a double skin of a building that was made of these awful sheet metal that comes as a byproduct from the stamping operation in Flint. When I asked John for samples, he sent me 20 tons of sheet metal, right? I mean, you can imagine. And then, as an academic, like I inspire students as well, right? So we have like a fabrication facility that I was able to store these sheet metal, and then they became materials for my students to explore every semester, right? And then I bring them these ideas and ask them what to do with these things, right? You as an architect might not think about, this type of waste happening in a different industry, but we can, as creative individuals, we can take these, this skills that we have, and then work through these problems through sort of an application or applied research methodology. So we go through iterations, we make drawings and models, and then eventually test them in the real material that John sent me. And students, go from bending and folding papers to bending and folding actual materials and then creating a real product. I mean, if you Google Texas A&M living wall, you'll see now a lot of news outlets that talked about this. We together presented this in the Sweden conference 2 or 3 years ago. But then, we developed a system that reduced the heat gain on buildings, allow you to grow vertically, right? So we're kind of studied all the living wall systems out there and solve all the problems that they exist in the market systems, and then we avoided those. So this is like one example of building connections, going through research and applied research in particular. I don't want to talk about research that sits on the shelf only in terms of paper published or dissertation written, but how to actually engage our students in academia in these problems. So inspiring the next generation is very important, and also finding solution. I mean, the wall has been patented. I can tell you that now. We have a company in Kansas City, a steel fabricating company, that they are interested in making this as a commodity that you can maybe buy from in Lowe's or Home Depot or so. So all these interests came about just because we put that full-scale wall on campus that's operating beautifully, right? People that they started to think about water harvesting and how to irrigate that wall. They started to, come to us and talk to us about possibilities. People that they are in the material science side, they came to us also, and they start to think about what is the best way to fold these sheet metal so we don't get sort of internal corrosions and internal distresses for the metal on the long run, so the systems can live longer. People that they are interested in agriculture, for example, right? How to grow food vertically on the surface of the blank walls in cities around us. So all these things, I mean, we are lucky because we are an academic institution, and we get all these other interested disciplines come to us, but really employing the creative aspects um, of finding solution to the waste problem and the reuse is unimaginable. And we just have to keep pushing for those. I've been trying to finding a way to how to streamline the information and the data from the large industries, for example. And just, if we can demonstrate that we can do successful products and systems, I would like for the other companies as well to open their waste black box to us and trust us that we can we can create solutions that can help everyone socially, environmentally, and economically as well. So that's it. I'm here to support John's in his presentation, and to thank everyone for your interest as well in the topic. This is a timely needed knowledge that we all need to be part of.
Thank you, Professor Ali. That was an excellent kind of delving into a lot of pieces of this that I think we didn't really touch on too deeply yet in the discussion, and maybe I can use it as an inroad for another question. But specifically, I think this kind of, especially the outgrowth from an architecture academic project to something that crosses over into the business school, something that shows, you can have a profitable venture coming off of this development. I think for some people, that's maybe the missing component when they think of sustainability. They don't necessarily have that conception that sustainability can be more profitable as well as less costly, right? And too often again, back to your initial slide, John, we think of that tree hugger, right? The person who maybe doesn't have the economics education is the stereotype. How do you see that these types of examples can maybe shift that cultural kind of conception of sustainability, maybe make it more centered, again, kind of in the business school, in the business realm?
Yeah, you got to show them the money. Show them the money. Those vehicle part, that project was a $10 million project a year, and increase as compared to the just selling the scrap for scrap value. But it was also reuse. It was also waste elimination. Waste elimination meaning it never really was a waste because it was reused as intended. So that project ran for a good 10 years. So if you do the math on it, you're looking at something around $100 million. Now that'll get a lot of people's attention, controllers in the plants, and when you line up the various manufacturing sites that have those sort of materials, and add all those numbers together, it really is massive. But yet, as I mentioned before, initially there were some people that didn't see it as an environmental project or a sustainability project. That's why we got to keep driving home that triple bottom line, like you said in the beginning, Nick, and also find those end solutions that are sizable enough to consume, a significant amount of material. It don't have to be all of it, but more the better. But it's also a factor of understanding not just the sheer volumes, but maybe you're going to reduce toxicity, or through, you know, green chemistry application, a material substitution to something that's more benign, and because that could possibly lead down to health improvements, right? People's, you know, health benefits. So when we talk about sustainability, you're really talking about an unlimited amount of aspects to get involved in. One of my old my group director, who was overseeing all the GM's environmental and sustainability work years ago, you know, he came up to me one time and he said, "John, man, you're playing in a lot of people's sandboxes." And what he meant by that is, you know, try to, he said, I was getting into a lot of people's areas that they're responsible for. But then he said, after he told me that you're playing in a lot of people's sandboxes, he told me, keep her up, keep her going. You know, because it's, you know, there's always that saying, people say, well, stay in your lane, right? Stay in your lane. Well, then on the other hand, you're also hearing, think out of the box. I'd like to know how you can do both. You're supposed to think out of the box, but not act on it? That don't make sense to me. So, you know, you really need to be a disruptor. You know, a lot of people used to ask me, well, what do you do for GM? And I said, well, basically I raise hell and get in trouble. And, you know, it's got a new name to it. It's called disruptive. It's called being a, you know, disruptor. And that now is being considered to be a good thing, right? But back then, I remember a day it wasn't so much. But when people tell you to think out of the box, ask them, now, does that mean you're telling me I don't have to stay in my lane? And then maybe you can, you know, work from there.
Appreciate that. Richie, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I do. And I appreciate John's presentation. I also appreciate Ahmed and what he mentioned as an architect. I'm an urban planner, and I'm here in Southeast Michigan, in Detroit specifically. And as John presented, I thought about the workforce development implications behind you know, thinking about waste reduction and reuse. I'm in a community where there's constantly conversations around how do we boost workforce development? How do we bring people back to work? How do we create jobs? And you know, as I listened to John's presentation, I thought about all the possibilities behind, you know, what I'm seeing out my window. I'm sure what you see in Flint regarding, you know, the ways that we could be employing people and getting people back to work, you know, using waste reduction, using ways to, you know, we were having all these conversations about the future of work. You know, we still are having these conversations about the future of work. And there's this opportunity here to have people be a part of rebuilding their communities and creating entrepreneurs who can help to create waste reduction. I'm just wondering, what's stopping local communities, you know, local leaders from really emphasizing this and saying, you know, they need this. They need entrepreneurs to be bringing, you know, their type of talent to help create businesses. We need people employed in these industries. We need the future of our workforce really, I think, is really depending on this conversation. So I'm wondering what's stopping local leaders, especially at a time like this, because I think we can see it with new eyes right now, that these workforce development solutions are needed, that reuse and waste reduction is needed. And this seems like a timely conversation to have right now. So what's stopping local leaders from really taking an initiative on this, John?
Yeah. So maybe I'll start, and Ahmed, if you want to jump in too, please feel free. Richie, how you doing, by the way? I know Richie. We work with the Great Lakes Leadership Academy, and what a wonderful group there as well. But at any rate, you said a key word there, I think, and that was, you know, what stops them from seeing. And that kind of relates back to what I said, you know, don't see things as they are, see them for what they can become. I think everybody has vision, the potential for vision. And I'm not talking about sightly vision. I'm talking about vision, seeing things possibly that don't exist today. But the real question is, do they see? And a lot of leaders don't see. That's why it takes people who, you know, are in the trenches, and a broad, diverse set of backgrounds, so they can see things that relate to them and interest them. And it starts too with, you know, working with the imagination of a child combined with the experience of an old guy, old lady, basically. And I don't mean to be derogatory of saying it that way, but combining those two elements together to create something good. That's the high level part of it. But then the other part of it is, as I said, you know, you want to target end use applications based on the material type's properties. You know, I gave that example of those decoys. But so that was kind of a labor of love on my perspective, because I love waterfowl, and I was able to see that material and immediately think of that. When I seen that emergency disconnect on that Chevy Volt battery cover, that hole, it was circular, but I knew it was about three inches in diameter. But if I enlarged it to an oval, 4-inch by 3-inch, it was the perfect location, perfect size for a hand wood duck to go in and out of. And it was eerily similar in that way, but also the interior hole had a fiberglass reinforced mesh inside there, which gave it added strength to deter predators like raccoon. So it was crazy that when I seen that, it was like all those properties and more by the way, matched the needs of that particular species. So it's a really hard thing, but all humans have that capability. People have that capability, especially if they approach it with something they're passionate about. It doesn't matter. They could love cats and find an end-use application. I'll give you an example. Dogs. I was down at Hamtramck Recycling. Big Murph down there. And they were getting materials from all over, and the guy who ran it, Matt Essie, and goes, John, I don't know what to do with these things. And they were absorbers for semi trucks made out of a polyurethane, real hard polyurethane, flexible type material that you know, allowed for the shock ride of a more smoother ride from the shock of semi trucks. So they're very heavy duty. And I took one look at them and I said, those things would make wonderful retrieving dummies for dogs, pets, you name it, retrievers, pets, didn't matter. And I put a rope tied on the end, short rope, the same sort of thing you'd buy in the store. And my dog gnawed on that thing for a year and couldn't break it down because it was so industrial strength oriented that my dog couldn't even bust it up, as compared to ones you buy in the store and they're gone in about 2 days because they consume them. That one didn't go, but it's an example of how you can look at something and relate to what interests you and find an end use application for it. And that one could have turned into a big business. It really could have. I don't know if that helps, Richie, but anyway, it's difficult there is no cookbook recipe that says, you know, step by step on how to do this. It's really about the imagination and applying your experiences and you know, to those end use applications that interest you or you know other people need.
Maybe it's a leap here, but I imagine that trying to convince the government officials is probably similar to trying to convince some business people about the value, right? So at some level, a fair amount of the value isn't necessarily monetary, it's future value, it's that marketing value, right? It's, oh, we are doing good things for the environment, so we're worth the extra 20 cents an item or what have you, right? There's a certain segment maybe that's willing to pay a premium for things that are more environmentally conscious. And I would imagine politically, there's probably a significant value with certain populations, certain areas, where if you can say, you know, not only am I creating these jobs, I'm putting money in the pockets of the people that I'm responsible for, but additionally, I'm cleaning up this community. I'm taking something out of a situation where otherwise it would just sit there. I think the tires for me were a beautiful example, because that's an issue that I know we have here in Flint. I'm sure is super big in Detroit as well as other communities. But how do we find a productive use for this stuff? And whoever takes the credit, that's fine, right? Because ultimately the goal is to work more and help the environment, help the whole community. So sometimes it's in you know, my limited understanding, I almost imagine that it's kind of, you can cut the ribbon on this great big development, right? That's the political kind of class's big piece of all this, and everybody else benefits, whether again it's economically or environmentally.
Right, right. And then telling the story, I always say a good project's not complete till it's talked about, and that's because it can do more good. It generates more goodwill. It lets people realize what possibilities exist. And it doesn't necessarily give them the step-by-step procedure, but it shows them. And my hope is that, when people hear these examples and stories, they'll take them a step farther and do even greater good. So, telling the story is such a big deal. It really is. Yeah.
I don't know if there's any other questions or
I would add also one more thing, since that question about engaging communities and what is the best way to do that. I mean, my approach to this is the waste story and the environmental and the circular economy story has always to be sort of the surprise inside the box, meaning that those products and those ideas that we think about and try to create, first of all, they have to be beautiful, and they have to be almost like you cannot distinguish them between, you cannot tell that this is made from a waste flow product or something else. And the second thing is just to put it in the face of the community, meaning I'll go back to that living wall example. My colleague that he has been doing research on living walls, he did that on the top of the roof of the architecture building in Texas A&M. He has been doing this for 3 years, recording how these walls perform and so on, and recording tons of data, but nobody saw them, right? And therefore the connection with the community was lost. When there was like a careful decision about where you engage the community with such prototypes and such project, meaning that the location of these prototypes and test examples are in the heart of the community, so they can engage with it, right? You see it every day. It's on their walking path. So they start to see, oh wow, look at this beautiful thing, and then the story of the waste and the story of the sustainability that's hidden in it becomes almost like a second surprise, like you open the box and then there is something also inside it, right? And they said, wow, right? So this is also made from waste streams, and they start to kind of, being engaged more and more. So I would say that we have to make solutions that they are beautiful and they are in the face of the community, and they don't have to look different than anything else that's made from conventional ways of doing things. That's, I think, the 3 things that I found important in dealing with the issue.
I have a comment.
Go for it.
I'm sorry, Nick.
Go ahead.
Okay. Just want to take a step back here. One thing I want to take a comment about Richie's comment of why we don't do certain things. One of my feelings about that is we don't have the right skill sets for these people that we're trying to seek the answers from. Look at our recent problem solving, which kind of throws back to something from the 1970s. You throw money at things, mass manufacturing, we've forgotten, or when we get in a crisis, we spend a lot of money, and there's no other creative solutions provided. So I think that's one of the problems, because our elected officials don't know how to do anything else but to appropriate funds, and that's how they solve every problem. We know what happened in manufacturing, when that was the only problem solving. We had to learn that the hard way. So this is kind of the same thing. Also, I have a chemistry degree from the University of Michigan, and I did take a class in I lost my train of thought, but obviously it was to your joke earlier. So what do you think green chemistry is? I attended a sustainability workshop the other day by Rich Helling of Dow Chemical. And essentially, when you look at a material, you have to look at it from cradle to grave. What are you going to use for the beginning products? What are you going to use in the manufacturing? And how are you going to dispose of this product? And the last part is often overlooked because your impact on the environment can be much greater by how you choose to plan to dispose of that product, or in this case, convert it to something useful. Because you're right, a waste is something that we just don't, it's a material we don't have any use for. And that's, as long as that is the case, we will have waste. So thanks for toxicology, that was the word.
Yeah, so
go ahead.
Yeah, so you bring up good points here. I know Rich Helling at Dow. Him and I have co-presented before. If you look up in the internet, you'll find the 12 principles of green chemistry and concepts, and that Rich may have spoke to that. Paul Anastas at Yale and John Warner both coined that term, and they have the 12 principles of green chemistry. Those principles kind of outline what green chemistry is about. But if I was to sum up what it means, it's really about creating a product or a process that has less impact to the environment and health and safety, and doing it with less is probably another good add into that. But yeah, look those guys up. They're considered, both John and Paul, the fathers of green chemistry, and Rich does a great job as well.
Wonderful. Well, we're running up against our time here. I don't know if there's any last minute questions. If not, I do just want to plug John's business one more time in case you're at a point with your business or your community where you're looking for these kinds of solutions, these kind of out of the box, hopefully out of the lane thinking, cross-sector thinking. And so again, his company is Sustainable Material Solutions, LLC. I think if you just Google that, you can find the web presence, or if you have any other links you want to plug, John.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn's all, and I'm basically working part-time, but anybody on this call wants to talk to me about things, feel free to get with me. I just, my ultimate goal when I walk off this planet Earth ship we're on is to be able to give back what I received and be thankful for being here and pass on my knowledge to others.
You certainly set a high bar for all of us. So I just want to thank you for your time, especially thank everybody for joining us today. Again, if you're interested in any additional services, UM-Flint provides them at no cost to you. And that's just at go.umflint.edu/IN. Again, thank you, John, so much for your time. And we hope to see you guys at our next one of these sessions.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Have a great rest of the day. Stay healthy.